Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Let Loose, written by Mary Cholmondeley in 1890. I love this story. I just enjoy reading it and I enjoy teaching it. As always, though, you need not like what it is that I like or what I teach you. You just have to read it and understand it as much as possible. Specifically, you want to see if you can find any references to vampires and use those in your essay, which, of course, is why is the vampire still so popular after all of these years? If you can find some evidence of vampirism in this story and link it to the reasons why you believe vampires are still so popular, you're perfect. So let's go. Let Loose by Mary Cholmondeley. Now, on the flip side, if you find nothing in this story, or you don't like it, or you don't think it's vampiric, you don't think it helps your paper, that's fine too. Then don't use it. Not everything we're going to read and everything you're going to research is going to lend fruit. It's gonna actually work for your essay, and that's the job of a researcher and a writer is to juggle those items and pick which is good, which are good, and which are not good. So let's read "Let Loose" by Mary Cholmondeley. As always, when I'm reading a short story, I'm going to read the first 2 pages, and then I'm going to let you finish the rest of the story on your own. This one reads quite simple. It's just telling a story. It's about 10 pages long, so you'll have about 8 pages to read once I'm finished. Let's go. Some years ago, I took up architecture and made a tour through Holland, studying the buildings of that interesting country. I was not then aware that it is not enough to take up art. Art must take you up too. I never doubted but that my passing enthusiasm for her would be returned. When I discovered that she was a stern mistress who did not immediately respond to my attentions, I naturally transferred them to another shrine. There are other things in this world besides art. I am now a landscape gardener. Okay, so our main character tried to be an artist, couldn't do it. Then he became a landscape gardener, which is actually kind of a cool job. I have a friend who's a landscape architect, and it is kind of artistic in how you do it. Let's continue. But at the time of which I write, I was engaged in a violent flirtation with architecture. So this is a flashback, so we know that our main character is going to survive whatever happens in this story. I had one companion on this expedition who has since become one of the leading architects of the day. He was a thin, determined looking man with a screwed up face and heavy jaw, slow of speech, and absorbed in his work to a degree which I quickly found tiresome. He was possessed of a certain quiet power of overcoming obstacles which I have rarely seen equaled. He has since become my brother in law, so I ought to know. For my parents did not like him much and opposed the marriage, and my sister did not like him at all and refused him over and over again. But nevertheless, he eventually married her. That's just so interesting. His sister didn't like this guy at all, but he continued to bother her, and eventually she acquiesced and married him. I wonder how often that happens in real life. I have thought since that one of his reasons for choosing me as his traveling companion on this occasion was because he was getting up steam for what he subsequently termed an alliance with my family. But the idea never entered at my head at the time. So he realizes years later the only reason why this artist guy or architect guy asked him to come with him on this journey was because he was trying to hook up with his sister. But he realized that years later. A more careless managed to dress I have rarely met, and yet in all the heat of July in Holland, I noticed that he never appeared without a high starched collar, which had not even fashioned to commend it at the time. So he says the guy was a crazy dresser. I never understood what he wore, but he always wore a high collared shirt, like he was hiding his neck. Now, you high school students know if a student is walking down the hallways of a high school wearing a turtleneck on a 90-degree day, they're probably not hiding vampire bite marks. They're probably hiding a hickey, right? I don't think that's what's going on here, though, that this man is continually hiding a hickey as he walks around the town. I just don't believe that. So why would anybody continually wear a high starched collar even when it is not fashionable? Why is he protecting and hiding his neck? Let's continue. Vampiric? Quite possibly. I have underlined that, of course. Of course I'm going to underline that. That's a crazy vampiric reference. Possibly. I often chaffed him about his splendid colors and asked him why he wore them, but without eliciting any response. One evening, as we were walking back to our lodgings in Middleburg, I attacked him for about the 30th time on the subject. Why on earth do you wear them? I said. You have, I believe, asked me that question many times, he replied in a slow, precise utterance, but always on occasions when I was occupied. I am now at leisure, and I will tell you. And he did. I have put down what he said as nearly in his own words as I can remember them. Okay, so what we're about to hear didn't happen to our main character. It happens to the jerk who married his sister. And that man told him this story. So we're getting a story within a story again. It's another frame story. So the story is the man and the guy going on a walk to do this work. And while they're on this work, on this job, that man tells our narrator another story of why he wears these high collars. So let's get into this frame story. 10 years ago, I was asked to read a paper on English frescoes at the Institute of British Architects. Now, for those of you who don't know, a fresco is a painting. I was determined to make the paper as good as I could, down to the slightest details, and I consulted many books on the subject and studied every fresco I could find. My father, who had been an architect, had left me at his death all his papers and notebooks on the subject of architecture. I searched them diligently and found in one of them a slight unfinished sketch of nearly 50 years ago that specially interested me. Underneath was noted in his clear small hand, frescoed east wall of church, crypt, parish church, wet waste on the wolds. Say that 6 times fast. Yorkshire via Pickering. The sketch had such a fascination for me that I decided to go there and see the fresco for myself. I had only a very vague idea as to where wet waste on the wolds was, but I was ambitious for the success of my paper. It was hot in London, and I set off on my long journey, not without a certain degree of pleasure, with my dog Brian, a large, discrimped, brindled creature, as my only companion. Now, I will point out, he's not wearing these starched collars yet, these high collars protecting his neck. So it's going to happen after whatever happens in this story. For the rest of his life, he'll wear that. So something's going to happen in this story, which is going to cause him to wear these high collars and protect his neck. I reached Pickering in Yorkshire in the course of the afternoon and then began a series of experiments on local lines, which ended after several hours in my finding myself deposited at a little out-of-the-world station within 9 or 10 miles of wet waste. As no conveyance of any kind was to be had, I shouldered my portmanteau and had set it in a long white road that stretched away into the distance over the bare, treeless wold. I must have walked for several hours over a waste of moorland patched with heather when a doctor passed me and gave me a lift to within a mile of my destination. The mile was a long one, and it was quite dark by the time I saw the feeble glimmer of lights in front of me and found that I had reached wet waste. I had considerable difficulty in getting anyone to take me in, but at last I persuaded the owner of the public house to give me a bed, and quite tired out, I got into it as soon as possible, for fear he should change his mind, and fell asleep to the sound of a little stream below my window. I was up early the next morning and inquired directly after breakfast the way to the clergyman's house, which I found was close at hand. At wet waste, everything was close at hand. I guess that means wet waste small. The whole village seemed composed of a straggling row of one-storied gray stone houses, the same color as the stone walls that separated the few fields enclosed from the surrounding waste, and as the little bridges over the beck that ran down one side of the gray-white street. Everything was gray. The church, the low tower of which I could see at a little distance, seemed to have been built of the same stone. So was the parsonage when I came to it, accompanied on my way by a mob of rough, uncouth children who eyed me and Brian with half-defiant curiosity. The clergyman was at home, and after a short delay I was admitted, leaving Brian in charge of my drawing materials. I followed the servant into a low-paneled room in which, at a lattice window, a very old man was sitting. The morning light fell on his white head, bent low over a litter of papers and books. He said, looking up slowly with one finger keeping his place in a book. Blake, he repeated after me, and was silent. I told him that I was an architect, that I had come to study a fresco in the crypt of his church and asked for the keys. The crypt, he said, pushing up his spectacles and peering hard at me. The crypt has been closed for 30 years, ever since, and he stopped short. Now, you guys know what a crypt is? A crypt is a burial vault, normally underneath something, like in the basement, the sub-basement or something like that, and where they just put dead people. They stack them in there. There's crypts supposedly all like underneath Paris and in France and all over Europe, and underneath like people's homes, they'd have these crypts way down low, and they bring all their dead people down there and they just stack them up. And over time, you have like skulls and bones and all sorts of stuff building up down in these crypts. He says, the crypt, pushing up his spectacles and peering hard at me, the crypt has been closed for 30 years, ever since, and he stopped short. I should be much obliged for the keys, he said. See, I'm going to highlight this has been closed for 30 years, ever since, and then he stopped short. And my annotation is simply a question mark. Just a couple of them, put 4 of them there. Ever since what? Will we find out? Probably. I should be much obliged for the keys, I said again. He shook his head. No, he said, no one goes in there now. It is a pity, I remarked, for I have come a long way with that one object. And I told him about the paper I had been asked to read and the trouble I was taking with it. He became interested. Ah, he said, laying down his pen and removing his finger from the page before him. I can understand that. I also was young once and fired with ambition. The lines have fallen to me in a somewhat lonely places, and for 40 years I have held the cures of souls in this place, where truly I have seen but little of the world, though I myself may not be unknown in the paths of literature. Possibly you may have read a pamphlet, sir, written by myself on the Syrian version of the three authentic epistles of Ignatius. Sir, I said, I'm ashamed to confess that I have not had time to read even the most celebrated of books. You are right, my son, said the old man, evidently disappointed, but looking at me kindly. There are diversities of gifts, and if the Lord has entrusted you with a talent, look to it. Lay it not up in a napkin. I said I would not do so if he would lend me the keys of the crypt. He seemed startled by my recurrence to the subject and looked undecided. Why not? He murmured to himself. The youth appears a good youth, and superstition, what it is, but distrust in God. He got up slowly and taking a large bunch of keys out of his pocket, opened one of them with an oak cupboard in the corner of the room. They should be here, he muttered, peering in, but the dust of many years deceives the eye. See, my son, if among this parchment there be two keys, one of them iron and very large, and the other steel and of a thin, long appearance. I went eagerly to help him, and presently found in a back drawer two keys tied together, which he recognized at once. All right, that's where we're going to stop. I just want to point something out. He's been there 30 years, and he doesn't even remember where the keys are. They're hidden in the back of a drawer, which tells me that he really hasn't gone into this crypt for those whole 30 years since something happened. Maybe we'll find out what happened. I'm assuming we do. Now, good authors, they open up questions in reading. Great authors answer those questions by the end of the story. Crappy authors don't. Crappy authors open up these great questions and then they're never answered and they leave you wondering, well, whatever happened with that? Good authors will answer them, and great authors will answer them in a satisfactory way where you're like, oh, cool, that makes such sense to me. So let's find out if Mary Cholmondeley is a great author or not. Let's also find out if this is a vampire story. I'm thinking back to me, and I have had only one note that might be possibly vampiric, and that's the whole idea of him hiding his neck. I've heard nothing about the word vampire hasn't been mentioned. I haven't seen any pale people. I haven't seen anybody with superpowers or power to persuade people. None of that. Just that high starch collar. But there's still 8 pages left in the story. You tell me what you think when you are done. Have a fabulous day.